Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather. Thanks for joining us here tonight. As always, you can get your latest forecast information free from the National Weather Service, no matter what part of Alaska you're in. If you've got a phone and it works, 1-800-472-0391 is the easiest way to get your weather information on your phone. If you want to use your data, try weather.gov/Alaska. That will bring you to a very large web page. It's really good if you've got a desktop PC or a Mac. That works pretty well. But if you'd like to use the mobile site, it's lower data, should load faster, and you can set it to act like an app on your home screen for your phone, your tablet, your mobile device. It works pretty well. Mobile.weather.gov is the easiest way to do that. Once you go to that page, it'll ask you where are you wanting to get weather information for. Type in Wasilla, AK, and then save that resulting web page to your home screen, and every time you open that, it'll act like your own personal weather station there with information about current conditions, any advisories, warnings, or watches out for the area, as well as your local forecast that you can look at a lot of different ways and ways that make a difference to how you're making your plan. So we hope we find that useful. If you can't find what you're looking for, please let me know. I'm happy to steer you in the right direction or answer any questions I can, whether it's about the Alaska Weather TV show, or perhaps something that you're finding on our website and you just can't find the right thing that you need for your weather decisions. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is an easy way to find me. Here's a look at our hazardous weather as we go into the next couple hours here and certainly into Thursday and Friday. The National Weather Service office in Fairbanks has issued high surf advisories for areas on the south-facing coastlines of the Seward Peninsula from Nome to about Golovin, and also for the Yukon Delta. Pretty strong southwesterly fetches coming up ahead of the remnants of a tropical storm that was in the western Pacific. It's now moving into the western Bering. It's deepening, and for the next 24 hours or so, we're going to have a really strong southwesterly flow coming up. As that moves in Thursday night and into Friday, that should start to bring some pretty choppy conditions up to coastal areas of the Yukon Delta and certainly into the south-facing shorelines there of the Seward Peninsula. This could bring up seas about 2 to 3 feet above normal high tide, a little bit of wave run up there along the coast. And offshore, those seas could build up to about 6 to 8 feet, and some of that will be breaking up over the beaches there. So now is a really good time to bring up the boats and things that might be down closer to the coast, because conditions are going to get pretty choppy in those areas. Again, the south-facing shoreline of the Seward Peninsula from Nome to about Golovin, and then along the Yukon Delta coastline there, because of that southwesterly fetch that'll be building up. Right now we don't anticipate any other problems along the southwestern coast, but it is something that we're watching here, and the folks at the National Weather Service office in Anchorage that work on the forecast for Southwest are certainly watching that, and I've talked to several of them today, and so far they don't see any major issues with any significant wave run-up or super choppy conditions that could cause some coastal areas. But if they change their mind, you'll see a coastal flood advisory or a high surf advisory for the region, and make sure you have a way to get those updates as we're in between Alaska Weather shows. If there's an update by this time tomorrow, I'll certainly pass it on. Here's a look at the drought conditions. This is updated last on the 19th of September. That was last week, so not a whole lot of new information that's ready to share just yet, but as we have been moving through a wetter period, certainly for the last couple of weeks or so now, a lot of this may change when we get the new update. So I want to share this with you one more time before perhaps we get another update here later this week. And hopefully we can see some easing of the drought conditions showing up now as we move ahead into late September and early October very quickly. But as it stands of the last update, extreme drought in southern southeast continues, and the same was said for the Wasilla, Palmer area, the Matanuska and Susitna Borough, and down into the Kenai Borough, including the Anchorage area. As always, what happens with the weather and impacts like that really make a difference from your perspective, not ours. And the way we learn about what drought means in Alaska is from you. And folks have been encouraging us to share this with you. Droughtreporter.unl.edu/map. That's droughtreporter.unl, which is the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.edu/map. And if you go here and submit a report, and you can say, you know what, my lawn was yellow, there weren't enough blueberries this year, didn't have any animals, things like that. Impacts that you suspect are drought related, whatever that may be, they'd like to know what you think, because this is really the first time we've had this level of drought in Alaska. Here's a look at the satellite picture now, and you can see this powerful area of low pressure. It's slowly creeping up the Yukon Valley this afternoon. It's been pushing a front across south central Alaska and had some vigorous winds with it across Kachemak Bay and the Barren Islands today, and certainly across the Anchorage area in south central. As that whipped through, we had some pretty good rain and a little bit of hail if you were passing through the Anchorage area today. Hopefully it didn't hurt anybody's planes as you were moving through. To the southeast, you can see a boundary working through the Dixon entrance right now. As this worked through and over Sitka earlier today, hail reported there as well. Low pressure working over the Kamchatka Peninsula, and a big spiral that you see out west is the remnants of a tropical cyclone, and that's what we'll be watching to produce that hefty southwesterly fetch as we go from now until tomorrow night. That's what's expected to move into the Yukon Delta and again the south-facing shorelines of the Seward Peninsula, where we could see some choppy conditions develop fairly quickly there. In the meantime, conditions have been improving a little bit across the eastern and northern parts of the interior, all the way down to about the Yukon Valley. Most of the Gulf is relatively quiet, save for that trailing edge of disturbed weather that's been passing through south central. A little bit of a lull here across southwest all the way up towards St. Lawrence Island is a little bit of a high pressure ridge tries to build in, but it's going to be very short lived. Here's that low pressure system now at 1,000 millibars, pockets of moderate to heavy rain passing through. Didn't hear any or see any reports of thunder and lightning, but certainly some hail there, so that could have been possible. Areas of light rain across southern parts of southeast. We've got a weak disturbance right here across the Arctic coast, and then a more powerful system building out here across the west at 971 millibars. You can see that front blowing north and east, slowly working its way toward the west coast, but what's really going to be significant is that southwesterly flow and the high pressure system down across the western Gulf that doesn't really get out of the way. Thus, we're stuck in that southwesterly flow into the Yukon Delta and the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula. Low pressure is leaving south central, heading for southeast tonight. That should spread some showers across southeast. We're also watching for some areas of fog. Don't be surprised to see that in the region. Maybe tomorrow and into Friday there, especially in the wake of this weather system here. High pressure is pretty strong, and that could trap some moisture in parts of southeast. So keep an eye out for that if that's going to impact your day. Watch for areas of snow across the Brooks Range and most of the Alaska Range passes. Also talking about some gusty winds that could ramp up as we head into Friday because of this weather pattern change across the Brooks and the Alaska Range. So if you're headed for passes there, watch out for that and make some plans. Low pressure working across the north and eastern Gulf there. Again, all trailing that system that's moving out of south central into southeast today. Showers will continue to work through the area, but really the weather should be stabilizing behind that as that creeps into southeast, and thus, again, that fog would be a little more likely. Out to the west, that 981 millibar low still creeping slowly eastward, and ahead of that, that southwesterly flow is kind of in the same old spot for about 24 hours, and that's why we think conditions could get a little choppy here across northern parts of Norton Sound and around the Yukon Delta. And again, at this point, we're not seeing any significant concerns for southwestern Alaska. As we get into Friday, again, that southerly flow is still working through, but it starts to ease up. So we should start to see some improvements as early as Friday. But the weather system that's left behind is a strengthening low across the western Gulf and just south of the Shumagins and the Alaska Peninsula. As that's moving east, this is going to deepen and start to push rain into Kodiak, probably parts of south central as early as Saturday night, and eventually on into southeast. But you have a nice large area of high pressure that's working into your region. Conditions should be improving for you as you get into Friday afternoon. High pressure is also protecting a large part of the interior. Clouds will start to fill in across the west and slowly work eastward, but things are also warming up. Let's take a look at temperatures. Thursday morning, 30s and 40s for southeast. The interior cooling off. Many locations well below freezing, especially in the north. Lower 20s for the Brooks Range, 32 in Utqiagvik, 33 for Nome, 42 for St. Lawrence Island, 30s and 40s for southwest, 45 in Kodiak, around Sand Point, 47 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 46 in St. Paul, up to 50 by the afternoon on Thursday. Southeast, you're looking at high temperatures in the lower to mid 50s. Sitka 56, the capital city 53. Cordova and Valdez in the lower 50s. Anchorage close to that. 43 around Homer, looks like 49 around Lake Iliamna. Fairbanks down toward Tanana and out toward Healy. Southward, probably upper 30s and lower 40s. 42 in Fort Yukon. Wainwright about 41 and 46 for our friends watching in Shishmaref tonight, 53 for Macoriac. Overnight lows Friday morning, Pretty cool stuff there from the Aviation Pass region to Arctic Village and southward. Teens and 20s. Look at Healy, down to 15 degrees on Friday morning. 30s and 40s for southeast. Temperatures are cooling off quick in Yakutat to 34. Looks like Bethel could drop to 42 degrees. King Salmon and Dillingham in the 30s and 40s. And Cold Bay, Falls Pass, King Cove all around 48 degrees with high temperatures on Friday, warming up in west and southwest, nearly 60 in King Salmon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to aviation weather now, IFR concerns will start out across the upper Tanana Valley into parts of the upper Yukon, hit and miss around the Wrangell-St. Elias region, including Yakutat, and the higher terrain of the Boundary Range all the way down toward southern parts of southeast and British Columbia. Look for IFR stretching into the Bering Strait and down through the central Aleutians. Out west, another round of IFR moving into Shemya and Kiska. That's surrounding an upper level low pressure system holding on out to the west. Across the Beaufort Seacoast, look for IFR to start, but watch for many areas of VFR across the Yukon Flats and west into parts of the middle Yukon Valley. And just as soon as you run through VFR, you'll run right back into MVFR across the Koyukuk Valley. Southwestern parts also looking at a swath of VFR that will shift eastward and expand in coverage as we go through your Thursday afternoon. Look for improvement across the Inside Passage across southeast, still looking at some lingering IFR around Hyder, in places just east of Ketchikan and Annette. Look for VFR conditions across the Yukon Flats. To the west, Ambler and Bettles likely flirting with MVFR, if not completely under it. And IFR conditions all the way from Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse down around the Horn toward Point Lay. Point Hope looks like it clears up a little bit more from marginal conditions down into VFR into parts of Kotzebue Sound. IFR should be fairly widespread from St. Lawrence Island southward toward Atka and then just west of Nikolsky. As we get into Friday morning, that boundary starts to shift eastward a little bit more. Watch for IFR to fill in through the Bering Strait, Wales, Tin City, and southward as you get into St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, and into Nikolsky for sure, and eventually making its way into Dutch Harbor. IFR will linger across the Beaufort Seacoast and south into Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, around Healy and Denali, and many areas just to the south, all the way up into the Alaska Range summits, looking for IFR there. South of that into the Susitna Valley, Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Prince William Sound, really all of southeast. Things look to be VFR for the start, and that should be maintained as we go through your Friday with MVFR hit and miss across some of the higher steps there north of the pass into the Copper River Valley, also across the upper Yukon Valley and some of the flats into parts of Arctic Village, the Beaufort Seacoast, and then IFR from the Chukchi Coast all the way down the west coast through Nunivak Island, Nitolan Strait, and the Yukon Delta into the Alaska Peninsula, and hit and miss out across the Bering. Looking at your pass conditions, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass expecting to be at least MVFR. There may be a time where it leans over to IFR as we go. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass and all the fat bears out there probably improving throughout the day. VFR conditions are expected. Rainy Pass, IFR conditions to VFR. Looking for improvement in Windy Pass to marginal conditions by the afternoon. Isabel Pass should also see improvement as we go. Mentasta Pass looking for an IFR start, improving throughout the day. Tanita Pass looking to improve to VFR as we get to the afternoon, and Portage Pass likely stays at VFR most of the day. A good day to get through there. And Chilkoot and White Pass, IFR conditions are expected in the morning. Look for improvement quickly in the afternoon and maybe again on Friday. Freezing levels show that cool air is quickly poured southward now into most of the mainland. Levels are at or below 2,000 feet in the morning. The surface freezing line, though, you can see carving out all the way around the Beaufort Chukchi Coast into southwest and lingering across the just interior coastal areas of the Gulf of Alaska. And then many areas out south and west of that are actually going to be above freezing. Freezing potential for icing then is also dropping anywhere from 5 to about 7,000 feet across the north to the south and west, and then about 4,000 to 6,000 feet as you make it out of Yukon into parts of southern southeast before you run into an isolated moderate threat. The jet stream has a brief ridge building out across western Alaska. Of course, this ridge is pretty large. It's right over mainland Alaska, really, which is, of course, not small. We have a powerful jet and a very deep area of low pressure building here across the western side of the Bering. That's channeling winds off of Asia, sending them eastward around 105 knots or so, and that strong component slamming into the Pacific Northwest at around 110 to 120 knots with another trough building here across western Canada. So we're kind of in this in-between zone right now. Low pressure is building out to the west, and we have a weaker area here just in the northern Gulf. Stronger winds coming across the Barren Islands and Kodiak Island tomorrow at 9,000 feet, 35 to 45 knots there. Southwesterly flow coming up the west coast. You see that 20 to 45, and light winds through the interior and into southeast around 10 to 15 knots. The strongest winds will be out across the western Bering. And you see at 3,000 feet, a similar pattern here. High pressures trying to hold on to south central, the western mainland. Anywhere from 45 to 50 knots they're coming over Bristol Bay. South and easterly winds blowing in anywhere from 20 to 30 knots across southeast, and light winds generally across the north slope, 30 knots though over the Beaufort. So turbulence tomorrow below 4,000 feet in most areas, below 6 in south central, considerable moderate for the Kenai Fjords, St. Lawrence Island, and most of the Aleutian chain. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the day-night band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down, and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or a radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western, or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
It happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image. That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible.
Right.
The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds and the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery.
Okay.
Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in.
Oh, okay.
It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora.
Wow.
And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
This looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about Dehne and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with your marine weather now. Sea ice is growing up across the region. Up here, we've got about 350 to 450 nautical miles north of Utqiagvik, and new ice is being detected with satellite sensors now. So good news. The sea ice minimum was reached. It was, I believe, tied for second in the lowest extent, or lowest coverage, I should say, for the Arctic Ocean there. So it was a significant year for the loss of sea ice. But we're now turning the page toward a new season, and new ice is growing up north. So nothing new really that close to Alaska just yet. Some of this marginal ice here is rotating around in the Beaufort Gyre, but soon, maybe, in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll probably see a decent change up here in the north. So the Alaska Sea Ice Program tells me. Here's a look at the southeast now, and you can see northerly winds in the Lynn Canal, 15 knots and 3-foot seas. Northwesterlies in the inside passage, up to 3-foot seas there. Notice the onshore flow across the outer coast, coming in from the north and northwest all the way to Cross Sound, and then coming in a little bit stronger from the west into the Dixon entrance and into areas like Port Alexander all the way up to Sitka. About 25 to 30 knots, 12 to 13-foot seas there. And then conditions improved dramatically on Friday. However, on Friday, with high pressure strengthening in the region, it won't be a surprise to see fog in many locations. So keep watch on that. The folks at the Weather Forecast Office in Juneau are monitoring that. And at worst, you might see dense fog advisories or areas along the coast that have poor visibility. So be mindful of that as you're moving around. Northerlies about 10 to 15 knots on Friday, up to 20 knots outside of the Dixon entrance, 15 to 20 on the inside, actually a little stronger up toward the Lynn Canal, with the 20-knot wind and 4-foot seas on Friday. For south central, northwesterlies are blowing 20 to 25 all the way down through the Kenai Fjords and into the Barren Islands. Northwesterlies there should bring about 7 to 10-foot seas crossing through just south of Kachemak Bay. Northerlies coming down Cook Inlet will be generally light, a little breezy at times, 15 knots with 2 to 3-foot seas there on Thursday, becoming northeasterly 10 to 15 on Friday. A little bit more of a south and easterly flow blowing into the Barrens, 3 to 5-foot seas there, and lighter winds across Prince William Sound and outside as well, as high pressure once again is setting up across the Gulf. Out across the west, this is where we get into that southwesterly fetch. You'll see that south and easterly flow working over the Bristol Bay region early on Thursday, but it becomes south and southwesterly as we go through the day. More of a westerly flow for the Kodiak Island region, 15 to 20 knot winds there, and 3 to 6 foot seas are expected on Thursday. And then a strong southeasterly flow, all feeding up into that stronger area of southerly winds working up the west coast. You'll see that in a minute. East and southeasterly winds 20 to 30 knots, anywhere from 5 to 8 foot seas across the Pacific, and 6 to 8 foot seas there from Bristol Bay west down the Bering Sea coast. For Thursday, southerly winds will rule the roost across the Aleutians, anywhere from 35 to 40 knots, 11 to 14 foot seas across the chain, anywhere from 10 to 16 foot seas across the Pacific coast. And then out west, we get into that southwesterly flow all ahead of that frontal boundary that's working its way eastward quickly on Thursday. 30 knot winds there with 12 to 19 foot seas. And you can see how the winds are shifting in, a little bit more of a westerly shift out across the extent of the arm. 15 knots there across Kiska to Adak, and then south and southwesterlies from the central and eastern chain, 20 to 25, 10 to 12 foot seas are on the Pacific side, and you're looking at about 8 to 9 foot seas from Unalaska west toward Adak across the Bering Sea coast waters. For the west coast now, this is where we're kind of watching for some coastal issues there with high surf and again some choppy conditions across the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula from Nome to Golovin and also across the Yukon Delta region here. Southeasterlies primarily in the morning on Thursday. That will become more southerly, and then eventually southwesterlies as we get into Thursday night into Friday. 30 knot winds for the most part. You're looking at about 12 to 16 foot seas in the region, especially from the Pribilofs up towards St. Matthew and the north and west of Nunivak Island. As we get into Friday, south and southwesterly winds will be found across the region. 6 foot seas inside of most of Norton Sound, but some areas offshore of Nome and Golovin could be up to 6 to 8 feet. And then westerlies across the Beaufort Seacoast on Thursday. Lighter winds across the Chukchi, 5 to 10, maybe 15 outside of Kotzebue Sound, 2 to 3 foot seas there. On Friday, winds come up, southeasterlies blowing offshore, 20 to 30, 5 to 9 foot seas across the Chukchi, and 15 footers across the Beaufort with 3 to 4 foot seas expected. Recapping tonight's weather. Once again, high surf advisories there are expected for the Nome to Golovin region and across the Yukon Delta. That'll start Thursday night and go into Friday, all because of the strong southwesterly fetch that's working up the west coast of Alaska. Showers will work through southeastern Alaska. High pressure sets up right in the middle. That could bring fog to southeast as we get into Friday. And a new part of the weather system will crank up across the western Gulf as we go into Friday, generally south of Kodiak Island. Doesn't look like much yet, but it could produce some decent rain across Kodiak and parts of south central into the weekend. And strong southwesterly winds continue for the west coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.